I would just borrow from those and I would plug those into the appropriate assignments. So students could still see, they could see the lecture almost as if they're sitting in the classroom with me.
Hey, welcome back to Cafe Creative. My name is Victoria Hagnai, and I'm an instructional developer in Cafe. And for this video podcast series, I go out and interview different instructors at S&T who are doing outside the box things in the way of teaching online. So Dr. Larson actually has a background in web design, web layout, that kind of thing. You'll be able to tell from the screen capture she shows of her Canvas homepage, and it looks very beautifully designed. So maybe yours, is not going to have that goal of beautiful design. But what I think you can take away from this is the different kind of practical things that she does with her students to make sure communication is the top priority, which you'll be able to see in how she goes about communicating, how she goes about layout and design, and even features like grading that can be used across all disciplines. So let's join our conversation.
Designing an online course is a lot like web design. We really have to think about who the audience is. And I think we forget that a lot. And one of the most common problems that I see in online design, online course design, is that there's a real confusion about who the audience is. So I'll see folks post assignments that will say something like, in this assignment, students will break into groups of 3, blah, 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 right? And that language indicates that the instructor is the audience, because students don't call themselves students. The most effective web page out there is Google, and it's the simplest web page out there. So I think your homepage should be really simple, but it should be linked in a way that's really appropriate. Would it help if I shared my screen?
Yeah.
So here's what my homepage looks like. So all of my announcements are posted at the top. So the most important information can be accessed right away.
Okay.
Then I've got a little banner just to add some glitz. And then I just have a very brief little categories of information where they can click to in order to find the information that they're looking for. So they can go week by week if all they want to look at is a week. And what this does is this will take them to the module that contains all of the information for that week. And the very first page of that module is an overview of what is due when. So there's no question about that. And again, the hyperlinks will take them exactly where they need to go. And those hyperlinks are very clearly indicated with the blue coloring and the underline. So they can go week to week, or they can look at, I have a page called Semester at a Glance, which is basically just a compilation of all of those week to week tables put together in one sort of master list.
I see.
This is what I tend to go to because I like to see what's coming up. But students tend to spend more time on the week to week because they can only compartmentalize that far in advance.
She uses things in Canvas like video response tools that has been really helpful for her students communicating back and forth with her. Given she's grading things like papers and essays, being an English professor, but these practices can actually be used across all disciplines.
Especially if you're moving an entire course online, you want to make sure that you're giving feedback to your students once a week. So you should be giving feedback, and that's extensive feedback, like lots of annotations and the like, on at least one page once a week. And so what I do is I break up my essays into smaller parts, and I have my students submit smaller portions of their essays every Friday. And then I annotate them, I give them really heavy annotations, and I respond to them. Sometimes I'll even include a video response. So I'll record myself talking through my annotations, because sometimes they might not really interpret my notes as well as they can if I'm speaking it to them. So I'll leave them written annotations, I'll leave them their score, and then I'll also leave video responses to them. And then by the time they get to submit their final paper, the full draft, I'm just going to be grading it on a rubric. So I don't necessarily have to give all the annotations or the video responses because I've already gotten that previously. Yeah, I leave a lot of notes for them, and then I score them really heavily on the rubric. And then by the time I get to their final draft, I don't need to leave a whole lot of heavy annotations because they've been getting feedback from me every week.
Right. I love that. Going back to something you said about the grading, I don't know if you're able to share your screen on that, but are you able to show me how you give a video reply?
But basically what I would do is I would pop in here, I would read the assignment,
Mm-hmm.
and I would hit this little media comment button, and what usually would happen here is my video would pop up and I can hit start recording, and then I can just sort of talk through what the students are doing. So talk through my response to the student work.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, this is what it would end up looking like.
Mm-hmm.
So get a little video here, and then they would be able to see my response.
Do you have any, and you kind of had this sprinkled throughout your talk, just common pitfalls that a professor might jump into not knowing, having worked the online environment before?
Yeah, a common one for new online instructors is just overloading your course with way too much stuff to do.
Mm-hmm.
You still have to remember that each of those items, even though it's just a hyperlink on a page for you, that's an hour to 3 hours of work for students. So a lot of first-time online instructors will have something due every single day and will just overwhelm their weeks with assignments, which is problematic for the student because they're trying to self-direct all of this stuff and self-motivate, and there's only so much time in the day. So keeping in mind that if you're not really sure it's 100% necessary, don't put it on there, and allow some weeks to be a little less strenuous. On the week leading up to a final paper, I'll have maybe a very simple kind of discussion board post to do.
Mm-hmm.
I won't load them up with work because they're going to be devoting all of those hours to finishing their final product. So I think a common mistake is that folks will give a lot of credit, no credit kind of assignments, or a lot of self-grading assignments throughout the weeks, and then they will save all of their real feedback, their substantive feedback, for that final paper. But what that does is that leaves these huge gaps in time where students are not really getting any kind of interaction with the professor. They're just getting either auto-graded stuff or, credit, no credit, kind of responses. And what they really want is a weekly check-in where the professor is leaving actual words that are directed to them specifically.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why during my schedule, I have these check-ins so that when they're working on their papers, so at the end of every week, right, they're checking in with a paragraph. So after week 2, they've got their proposal introduction. After week 3, they've got their research design. And so this means that by week 3, they're getting all of my feedback on the introduction. By week 4, they're getting all of my feedback on the research design. So they feel like they're in constant conversation with me, so that by the time they get down here to week 6, and they submit their final draft, they've already had so much interaction with me that they're totally okay with not having a lot of feedback on their final draft.
So I'm wondering, how do students typically communicate with you? How do you like to communicate with them the best, so they are getting that constant, like you were talking about, feedback?
Yeah, I mean, different students are going to communicate with me in different ways. So I've learned to just be flexible. Some students are emailers. I tend to prefer email because it's all kind of right there and there's a paper trail. And that's what I tell them I prefer. Although I do set strict business hours so that they know that they can expect me to respond pretty quickly between the hours of like 8 a.m. and like 6 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
But outside of those business hours, don't expect me to respond right away. That doesn't mean that I won't respond right away, but they at least know in their mind, if I don't respond right away, I'm not ignoring them. But what I've learned is that I can't impose communication styles upon my students. It's much better if I'm the flexible one. So I do give out my cell phone number. Students have never called me Several have texted me. And usually it's just those students who need a different kind of contact, need a more intimate kind of a direct response, a real-time kind of response. Those are the ones who are going to text me. Most aren't even going to bother with it because they don't want to bother me. But the few who do text me are usually the ones that just need a little bit more special handling, and I'm here to provide that to them.
So thanks so much for joining us. Remember, if you'd like to stay updated with weekly interviews, just hit that little subscribe button below. We're also on Spotify if you want to listen to us on podcasts. I'll see you next time on Cafe Creative.